So I'm going to screen share, and we're going to dive in today. Okay, so guys, you probably saw from the listing of all the events that today we're going to focus on clips. Now, the clips window is a whole new entity in DP10, and the idea is we wanted an interactive environment for audio loops, MIDI loops, effects. And so to kind of point out, I want to go slow today. I want to make sure everybody understands the concept of clips and how they can be used. And I've got a number of different examples to really solidify and illustrate how this can be very cool. Even if you're a songwriter or a film composer or a musician, maybe you're not going to perform live, but you want to see if you can integrate clips into the way that you work. And so that's my goal today, is to give you different ways of seeing this feature. So what we're looking at right now is a very simple project. And I want to talk a little bit about the way we've always worked with loops and MIDI inside DP. So you can see we've got, a virtual instrument here, ethno, assigned to a sitar, MIDI track. And we have a blank audio track with nothing on it at all. So if I was going to add a loop, and I want to bring up something we've added here to DP10. If I go to I'm inside the Consolidated window. You guys can see we've got the main window, and I've got the left bracket and right brackets we can open. If I use Shift right bracket, it will open up the right side of the Consolidated window. I'm going to switch over here to the content browser. So the content browser is new to DP10. And the concept is we wanted something that you could get to various types of information: audio files, clipping windows, effects, insert settings, loops. So this is where you can now load and think about what kinds of things you want to have in the content browser. So at the very top, let's just talk about how it's organized. So the audio files, the very first thing you're going to see is the project folder. This is my project called Clips Demo, and I've got a bunch of chunks, and I've got a lot of audio in this project. But so right off the bat, I can get into here. And by the way, at the top of DP, if the speaker icon is called audible mode, and once that's turned on, one cool thing about this window is if I click in this window, it will audition things that are happening that are actually present here inside the content browser. So that's a cool feature. Like if audible mode is turned on, you can click and audition things right in the window. So this is the audio files for this project. I don't have any bounces currently for this project or any kind of clippings. Clippings, remember in DP, and we could do a whole webinar on clippings, but the idea is that you can have global clipping windows or project-specific clipping windows. And clipping windows are, think of them like almost like buckets that you can put different types of data in. MIDI tracks, audio tracks, you can put entire sequences in there, you can put audio effects, inserts, can all go in those windows. So there's the clippings for this project. Now we move down to places. Now I've set up, and you can see you can add places. I've actually went out and picked, for instance, we can navigate now to your hard drive. Let's say you've got a folder. You've got a bunch of old loops, cool things that you've collected over the years. You've got Rex files, broadcast wave files. You've got snippets of things that you want to actually now have in your directory inside the content browser. You can actually navigate to those. So I've actually picked the Apple loops. All of our Apple computers, if you're an Apple guy, you have access to Apple loops that come with your computer, and you can use those in this clips environment. So I've added the Apple loops. I've added my own loops. And of course, I've got my own sort of production toolkit. And I'm really big on people creating their own library of sound effects that they can use on their own productions. And so you can see I've got it organized into things like bass drums and booms and risers and cymbals and things, because I work on a lot of production music. So I tend to like to have those kinds of effects that I've created over the years and have them in my productions. And sometimes it's nice to have them as audio over MIDI, just because you know what they are, you can drag them in, you can edit them, they're ready to go. You know how well they're edited and clean. You don't have to think about triggering them as MIDI loops. They're just audio production toolkit. So again, we can add whatever places you want. You can have unlimited places. You can, again, whatever folder you want to locate here in the content browser. Now here's another cool thing. As I move down the list, here are the instruments that I've installed on the computer here. I've got, of course, the MOTU. I've got native instruments, like all of us have, like Spectrasonics, and all these different virtual instruments. If I want to come in here, I can load in virtual instruments into, if I went into, let's say, the mixing board, and I have a virtual instrument track, and let's see here, let's look at the ethno. I can load in right from the content browser virtual instruments into the mixer. So we can do that. We can, from whatever company we want, we can go down here to effects. And now you'll notice when I click on effects, it's going to take a breath because I've got a lot of different plugins from different manufacturers. Isotope, Waves, sound toys, universal audio, all those can live in here as well. So for instance, if I go into MOTU, when I go into, let's say, the FET76, which is our cool analog compressor, and here's the Dr. Pepper preset, so I think I'll use that one on this project. I'll just drag it in, no problem. We can delete that. So that's cool. In the content browser, you can get to things like your effects, your instruments, your clippings. You can get into your loops. And we can work our way down here into insert presets. So remember in DP, if you use a lot of effects and you want to save those as quick presets, whatever effects you have here in the channel, the very top is the actual insert settings. So let's say you want to have, we could put after ethno, something like a MOTU Masterworks leveler. Okay, compressor. And we like the combination of these two things. We like the way that the ethno hits the compressor. We might actually save this as an insert preset. I'll save it as an instrument. So this is going to be ethno, Masterworks Leveler ML1. Perfect. I'll save that as something I might actually use later on. And when I save it, you'll notice now, if I go down, there it is in the list, ethno, Masterworks Leveler ML1. And I might want to create a folder to put all those in and organize. So that's a cool thing. And we can get into those insert settings right from the content browser. And then, of course, whatever samples. MOTU has, some factory instruments that include samples, like, the Model 12 has samples, the Nano Sampler has samples, so you can get to those as well from within the content browser. But what we're going to focus on today, we were talking about the traditional way we record audio and loops inside DP. So let's go back into my production loops. Let's click on a couple and audition them. Okay, that sounds like we could use that. So I'm going to hit stop. I'm going to just drag this right into the audio track. Now, right off the bat, you'll see that it's not lined up. Okay, so all I have to do now is turn on stretch. Boom, it automatically says, oh, you're a 4-bar phrase. So it quickly updated it, it time stretched it. And so this is another quick little benefit, even if you're not a clips person, all the work we put into DP10 in regards to the way beat detection works, the way we analyze audio files, the way that it deals with tempo information, that's all dramatically improved. Again, so whatever you learn from today in terms of clips, if you decide to use it or not, you are benefiting from the technology in DP10 by the way that we're able to stretch and bring in audio. So I brought this in, so let's look for something else. So here's a groove. So let's bring this in here. And so I can drag it in, and DP analyzes it and go time stretches it perfectly. So now I've got this little groove here, and I've got a MIDI sitar part. And it looks like I've got it set to loop here. We're using the new memory cycle strip here, the green strip. So let's just play it. Turn it down a little bit. So it does this little modulation. We go into the second loop. And so this is a way that we might have worked where we're dropping in loops. Things are time stretching. Maybe they're audio loops. Maybe they're slice information from virtual instruments. And we're kind of thinking more linearly, and we're dragging things in and dropping things and so on and so forth. And that's cool. That certainly works, and things will time stretch. But what if you wanted to play loops in an interactive way? What if you could trigger them from a MIDI keyboard? What if you could do a lot more with those types of loops? And that's what we're going to get into, is the clips window. That's a whole new environment for doing that. So we've got the audio in here, and again, we can always turn on and off stretch so that things lock to tempo or not. But let's talk about MIDI as well. So right now, we're looking at the traditional way we recorded MIDI, which you guys all do all day, which is, we go into the MIDI tab, we've got our MIDI notes, but we've got a new way you can deal with MIDI tracks, and we offer this as a preference. And here's the concept. If I highlight this MIDI part, let's say for these 8 bars, and I go up to region, I can now pack those into clips. Now look what happens. It has a different look to it now. And so now you're really thinking of this MIDI phrase as an object that I can repeat, that I can loop, that I can copy paste. And it's a little bit more like other DAWs in the sense that you're able to repeat and loop these various clips now. So the MIDI, we've just converted it now. What we did is, I'll undo. We highlighted the MIDI track, that was traditional MIDI track that we recorded, and we went to region, and we're gonna now pack this into clips. So if I go into the sequence window, here it is. Here's the actual MIDI clip. Now watch what happens when I go to the top. I get a loop icon, and now I can just drag this in and out. So some people want to be able to work with MIDI in this way, where they've got a phrase and they want to be able to pull it out and repeat it endlessly. Say 20 times, 10 times, 5 times. And now that I can record it as a clip, I can do that pretty easily. So let's, how do I turn that preference on in DP? Let's talk about that for a minute. Under Preferences, towards the bottom, you'll see MIDI Options. And we can turn on recording MIDI as MIDI in tracks as clips. So if this option's turned on, whenever I record MIDI in DP, it'll look like this form, where I can loop it, I can change it. So now if I want to edit it, what I do is I double click on it, it brings up our new clip editor. And you can see where you get into your settings like your name, your color, the duration, so on and so forth. And of course, this is the window where you can do all of your traditional MIDI editing. You've got your piano scroll, changing your notes, changing your velocities, inserting controller data, volume and stuff like that, or looking at lines or points for automation data. So that's the actual clip editor. So this is sort of giving you an overview of where we're headed now, with the idea of recording loops, recording MIDI, and now this idea of dealing with MIDI as a clip. So now we're going to kind of switch away from this. We've been talking about the new content browser, and hope you guys can take advantage of that to getting audio or bounces, or again, setting up places which are shortcuts to various windows you're going to want to use for your loops and audio phrases that you might want to actually bring into DP. Cool. So that's what we're doing here. We're now going to switch over. So let's say we don't want to work by placing things in the timeline. We want to use a more fluid environment. So we're going to go into the Clips tab. So I'm going to erase the data in these tracks. We're going to switch to clips. Now you'll notice right off the bat, the same audio tracks that we had in tracks show up in clips. There's the audio track, and you can see it's stereo. There's the MIDI track, there's the virtual instrument, there's the master fader. And now you'll notice this is the column for this track. Okay, this is audio track. There's nothing in these columns. These are empty cells. Okay, so now this is where we can put loops now on these empty cells, and they become clips. So let's do that. Let's go back to my drum loop. There it is. We're going to just drag this over to the very first cell here, and then let's find another loop. So now we're going to drag this to the next one down. And now if I double click on it, I can look at it and say, oh, cool, DP's already found that it's a 4-bar phrase. It's already time stretched it. It's perfect. You can see I've got this yellow loop bar. It's good to go. Maybe I want to actually change the color. Let's do that. Well, I want to make this one sort of a darker blue, kind of a royal blue. Perfect. That's great. So now I've got one audio track, but I've got multiple loops. Maybe we add one more here, kind of a groove. Let's see. Yeah, that works. So we'll put this one, we'll skip a ways down here. Okay, there it is. It was just thinking for a minute. So if I double click, let's look at it. So this is another 4-bar phrase. Okay, so now if we want to trigger this, here's the idea. If I play enable this, it will drop down. And if there's nothing here in the queue, it will immediately start playing. So now it's going to just play and play and play and loop. But if I want to drop something else in place of it, how long will it take for that new addition to drop in? That's based on the cue grid. So this is set to 2 bars. So if I drop down an 8-bar phrase, an 8-bar loop, and it just loops and loops and loops for a long time, and I decide, well, I'm tired of that, I want to put something else in its place. Well, if I drop it down, it'll be at 2 bars is the grid, so it'll drop in. And of course, I can extend that. I can say, well, I want it to update every 8 bars, 16 bars, or very quickly, like after a certain beat. It'll drop in. So we're going to drop this in, say it's playing. We'll just let it go, 4 bars. So now we're going to drop something else in its place. It's going to cue 3, 4. There it is, 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, I'm going to drop something else. So we've got that happening. So now what about the MIDI? So you guys are starting to get the concept here. We have one audio track, but now we have multiple clips in this column, and I can play enable them, and as they drop down, if there's nothing in the queue, they immediately play, and they play and loop and loop and loop until I drop something else in place of it. And based on the grid, how quickly will it drop in? It will come in and keep playing, and so I'll just continue this. And so I could start thinking, well, now I want to have all these different types of loops. I'm going to build all these into these columns. Now let's do something with that MIDI track. I'm going to go back to the tracks window, rewind to bar 1, and I had undone that MIDI track, so let's actually go back through the undo history. And there's the MIDI track. So we'll get rid of the audio, and let's actually unpack it for a moment. So we'll go back to region, and we're going to unpack the clip. We're going to highlight the first. Okay. So if we want to take the MIDI clip, we can copy it. We can go back to the clips window, and of course here's the MIDI track. We can just paste. So there it is. Double click. There's the MIDI data that I just did. And so now I could change the loop point and say, well, I only want this to play for whatever, 3 bars. And so you can set that up. And of course, you can just drop it down and it'll play. So you can see now we're starting to get through the basics of, I have MIDI tracks, MIDI clips. I can copy data from other edit windows. I can paste it in here. I can have multiple cells or clips in one MIDI track. I can have multiple loops in an audio track. And so now you're thinking, well, how can I have multiple loops playing at the same time? And that's what we're going to go through, different examples of how this works. But that's the basic architecture. Architecture is that you have audio tracks, MIDI tracks, and in the clips window, those tracks show, and you have a column where you have empty cells, and you can put, again, audio loops of any length. They could be 2-bar phrases, 4-bar phrases, they could be entire songs. And when you drop them down, they'll play and they'll loop until you drop something in its place. And it can be MIDI tracks, it can be effects, and it can be very creative. So that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to continue on our path here, and that was sort of the basics. And so we talked about the content browser, dragging in audio loops. If stretch is turned on, it will conform to the tempo. But now we're in the clips window, and we're dragging in audio files, and then we're starting to get into this idea of triggering clips. So we're going to go to another example here, clips groove. And so now we've got something a little bit more involved. I'm going to close the content browser. Okay, so in this timeline, I've set up looks like a 16-bar phrase, and I've got more tracks this time. I've got a live bass part. I've got some various audio tracks. These audio tracks are going to a bus called group, because I wanted to send them into an auxiliary track so I could put an effect on the group. That's something a lot of us do with busing. We want to create a stem, or we want to be able to put an effect on a group of vocals. We'll send them to a common bus, to an auxiliary track, and then we don't have to put the effect on every track. We can put the effect on the auxiliary track. So I'm using that concept here in the clips window. I've got, you'll notice something here, these stab keys. This is just an audio part that was recorded. And so that's something I want you guys to understand about clips, is that you're not just triggering things that are in the clips window. You can trigger things that are in the track. So let's do that. I'm going to highlight these tracks. And by the way, Shift comma is the shortcut for the clips window. We're used to things like Shift M for mixer, Shift S for sequence editor, Shift T for tracks, but Shift comma is the clips window. And you can see there's all the tracks that we had in this, and we've got my live bass, we've got these things, there's the stab keys part. So now you'll notice there's a new way I want you guys to think about this window. We were thinking sort of in a way vertically, okay, what's in a track and what can I play in the track? But now I also want you to think horizontally. If I play enable the scene, everything left to right will drop and play. So now this is where it gets creative. That's why you might want to have multiple tracks with different loops on them so that you can start thinking creatively. Well, if I trigger scene 3, what's going to play? Well, this is going to play and this is going to play, but it might be nice to take this guy and option drag him down and so on. And you're starting to think of your arrangement. Okay, how do I arrange these different elements? What's going to play if I click on one? What's going to play if I click on a scene? And by the way, you can rename your scenes. You can say, well, this is intro, chorus, and so on and so forth. So your scenes could be songs, song sections. It could be anything creative that you wanted to have trigger at one time. And that's the concept here. So let's just try it here. Let's play some things and see what we have. So I'm going to play scene 1. Turn it down a little bit. I can just, by the way, I'm going to stop it for a second. You'll notice that I can X out and I'll be dropping things in and out as I play. And that's where I want you guys to get into the idea of everything's fluid, everything's dynamic. You can change everything as you go. And I'm going to start playing different elements. Now this live bass part, what is this? This is a live, bass coming in here through a DI. And so I actually recorded it out here in the timeline. Sometimes when I'm doing clips, I'll have an area that I'm going to loop, and then I'll do my work sort of outside of the range. Okay, so I did this loop out here at bar 18. I copied it, Command C. I went over to the clips window. I pasted it in. I double click. It looks like it's ready to go. So I'm going to actually bring in and out the live bass part as a live element. Now the other thing I want you guys to check out, remember we were talking about this stab keys part comes in at bar 9. Okay, now check this out. That's going to happen at bar 9. If I'm in the clips window, and I'm playing something on the stab keys part. Let's say right now I've got this bass groove, this great tonal bass loop happening here. Well, if I play enable the very top track, that's the actual timeline of Digital Performer. So this top track is the actual track that is, so if there's something in the timeline, in this case stab keys, it will play from the track itself. So we can put a loop in place of it, and then we can also trigger what's playing in the track. And I'll demonstrate that by starting with a bass part and then bringing in the stab keys at bar 9. And I've got my grid here set to 2 measures. So sometime around bar 7, I'm going to trigger the stab keys track and it's going to drop in place. And so you'll see, and I'll be dropping elements in and out, trying to create somewhat of a performance here. So I'm going to hit play. bass. There's the stab keys. I'm going to add a MIDI part. Some more elements here. Different part. Oh, so now here's an interesting thing that we're going to do. So far we've been bringing in a live part. You can see around bar 7 I triggered the stab keys part, which brought me back to the timeline, which has this live stab keys. Cool, we're back to clips again. I'm deleting things as I go. There's no glitches. You can drop things in and out. And again, every couple bars, I'm trying different elements, triggering different things. I played some MIDI parts as well, too. There's a little variation between these two MIDI parts that I'm dropping down here. And now check this out, this group that we talked about, this bus, I put a flanger on here. And so I want to see what it sounds like to trigger in the effect of the flanger. So I'm just going to hit play. In fact, why don't we... Yeah, I'm going to play from the top. I'm going to clear everything that's playing right now if I just click on this X down below. Now everything's out, and there's nothing in the queue. Now watch what happens. You see this queue area? If I play enable a scene and it starts playing, I can start loading up different scenes in there, and they'll start parking themselves in the queue. And every 2 bars, it's going to flush out what's playing in the timeline. And I can just keep refreshing it with new stuff that I'm dropping down. And that's the beautiful thing about the queue. And by the way, we're in the mini menu of the clips window. You can see that I've got it set where I can enable multi-queue. If multi-queue is turned off, then you can only drop things into play. But if queue's turned on, you can drop things down. It will stack what's in the queue until it's time for it to start playing. So I'm going to actually do that. We're going to drop here from scene 1. Okay. And then I'm going to trigger the next scene. I'm going to drop the next scene. Stacking. I've got the flanger in. Get rid of the flanger. I'm going to add a delay. So that's kind of interesting. I'm going to add a filter sweep. I'm going to drop it. Filter sweep's going to come down. We're going to trigger scene 1, 2, 3, 4, out. So again, this is sort of, again, the basics that I want you guys to see now. We have multiple tracks. We have multiple clips within each track. We're starting to get into this idea of scenes as musical sort of collections of ideas, you know, intros, verses. Now, I want you guys to see something here. If I play enable scene 1 and it drops down, okay, and I go to another scene and drop something down, if there's nothing in a cell, it's going to continue to play what's in there. So sometimes I advise people to actually create an empty clip. Okay, if I create an empty clip, it will be used as a means when it's triggered to flush out what's currently playing down below. So that's something to keep in mind, is that you might use my E's here. These are empty clips that I'm using to flush out what's playing down below. So keep that in mind. Now when it comes to effects, I want you guys to see how this works. You see how I've got inserts? And we didn't even really talk about this. This is kind of self-explanatory, but I wanted to talk about this. Every track has a mixer, you see, and the effects that we use in our traditional mixer will also show up in clips. So here I've got some various effects and stuff on the live bass part, probably a chorus and some EQ and whatnot. If I go back to the clips window, same effects show up. And I've got, of course, I can just get access to soloing the track, muting the track, changing the levels. All that's the same at the bottom part of the clips window. It's just that the way that we want to actually set up the effects, if we wanted to do like drop an effect down, and I'm doing that on the master fader. So here's the master fader. I've got all these effects that are bypassed. And then I'm actually, when I trigger them, they'll drop down and they'll start playing those effects. So this is a cool idea with clips, that you can have filter sweeps, delays, echoes, any kind of compressor, something that's pumping, and you want to create an effect. You can put those on the master, drop those in as needed. And again, it's all about kind of performing these elements live. So you could do this interactively and play and loop and create grooves. And I want to get into other ways of using it in more of a song structure. So let's actually go to that too. So you guys get the concept of of having audio in the track, having live elements and so on, having groups, and playing those clips. We'll go to another example here, and this is an example with Stylus. Okay, now you'll notice that we've got a traditional song here. We've got a guitar and bass part, and here's what it sounds like. So it's just a groove, kind of a funk groove kind of thing. And so now if I want to try auditioning loops, and I didn't really have clips, I might open up Stylus or different drum virtual instruments and start auditioning loops just to kind of get a groove going before I get the drummer to lay down his part. But what if I used clips for this? Like, is there a way that I can do something more spontaneous? And we certainly can using the clips window. So let's do that. I'm going to highlight the tracks. We're going to go to Shift. And now look, here's my guitar part, here's my bass part. I don't have any effects on them, but I did have Stylus. And so remember with Stylus, you'll notice, and this is true of a lot of virtual instruments, if you double click on it and you go into various channels, so for instance, if I click into the browser here and I pick the various elements for the MIDI channels, you can drag and drop the actual Stylus slices. So what I actually did is I went in here and I picked 5 different sounds that I liked in Stylus, and I went into the clips window, and now I'm dragging and dropping these to the various clips, and then I'm color coding them. You'll notice if you double click on a cell, it brings up the editor. I can say, well, that's an empty clip. I'd like to have it be kind of sort of an orangish color, yellow color, and so on and so forth. And by the way, you can also shift select multiple, and you can name those. You can option, I can move, if I want to create a different scene, I can option drag things around. It's very easy to use. You'll get your head around it very quickly for being able to copy things, delete things, color code things, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to play that groove, and we're going to try different combinations of Stylus elements just to see what it would sound like. And again, more interactively as opposed to just fishing through the virtual instrument. So I'm going to hit play. Okay, let's try some congas. Snare. Try a kick. We'll bring in more of a groove here. Take out the congas. So this is, again, you're instead of just playing these things from the virtual instrument, you can just take a moment. And now that I've got these saved, by the way, I might just keep those as clips. I could actually save those clips. We could actually put those in, we could copy those to clipping windows. See, I could say, well, we're going to copy those to, I could set up my own Digital Performer clipping window, and I could name it, grooves, and I could highlight these various elements, and I could go to edit, and we could copy those right from where they live into a clipping window, so I could call those back up later on if I wanted to, if I delete this project or I come back to it. Hey, what did we use that time? So there's a couple different ways to do it. Or don't forget, in the mixing board, I could obviously save Stylus. Inside I could save a multi, and so on and so forth. And there's the traditional mixing environment. There's the clips window. And so we were just kind of creating our own scenes. I didn't even actually play enable scenes. I was just playing individual clips, but I could certainly have played scenes. I can rename scenes and so on and so forth. This is giving you sort of an idea of, hey, I'm just doing songs, and how would I use clips? Well, I could use different elements and loops and phrases from clips to audition them on the fly. Well, is there a better way to do it than to click on them? Yeah, why don't we actually set that up real quick? And so let's talk about MIDI Learn. And you guys can see I've got my trusty Akai controller here. It's USB and bus powered and class compliant. It's just ready to go. Plug and play. So super easy to use. So how are we going to use this today? We're going to go to the mini menu of the clips window, and we're going to go to MIDI Learn. And as soon as we go there, you can see everywhere you see the icon here, the gray icon with the play button, that's an area where I can set up a MIDI Learn. So I'm going to click here on scene 1, and I'm going to tap on my pad, and it's going to assign. I've assigned pad 1. We're going to go to scene 2, and obviously I'll click on the next pad over, and let's do the third. And also, it might be nice to actually clear it out. So as the guitar is playing, I want to cut them off. So let's do that. This is the now playing button. If I click on this, this will be number 4. And now I could go in here, and if I've got lots of knobs on my controller, I could do individual clips, I could do effects, the sky's the limit. You can set this all up. And look how easy it is to use. Now I just click anywhere outside of it. I'm going to hit save. Now we're going to make sure that master is turned on in the commands window. Master is to allow MIDI control from a device to control Digital Performer. And master is enabled. So what do we have here? Let's just clear out what's in the queue. And I'm going to hit pad 1. It's playing. And that's scene 1. Queue up 2 and 3 at the same time. They'll queue up. I'm going to shut it off with 4, 2, 3, 4. Cool. So that's easy, right? So now we've got, MIDI parts coming on clips. We're triggering, loops from different instruments. They don't have to be loops. It could be anything. It could be some little MIDI part that you have, some little created part. It could be an audio phrase, MIDI phrase. And so now I'm triggering entire scenes. I'm cutting things off, and I'm auditioning it against the live guitar and bass part. And again, it's more interactive as opposed to just dropping things in and having to mute things. It's much more spontaneous. And I think once you can sort of get your head around how that could benefit you, maybe you'll start really integrating and using this cool feature in DP. I feel like it really opens things up. I mean, DP is such a powerful program for recording audio and film scoring, and now we've got this unbelievably interactive environment with clips. And it's just, wow, I can do all that with DP. I can trigger loops and phrases and do all the automation with film scoring and all the editing features. And so that's why, again, there'll be more examples to get your head around it. In fact, maybe we'll pause here for a moment for some questions and we'll continue on our way. Daryl, did you have a question?
The question was how, when you drag in the Apple loop, how does it stretch to the tempo? And I just noticed that there is a stretch.
Yeah, exactly. Good call.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, by the way, so I'm glad you pointed that out. If the audio track that you're going to, the stretch is enabled from the tracks window, or you can do it from the sequence editor as well. But then, like you said, it'll detect the tempo, and boom, you're in the game.
I think that's great.
Cool. Thanks, Daryl.
Yeah, I had a question about the master. Where did you find that again?
Oh, master is Shift L. That's DP's commands window, or under Setup Commands. It's the very top check mark. Make sure master is enabled. Cool.
Okay.
Victor, do you have a question?
Yeah. What's the limit on the number of characters for label?
You mean for just generally like DP track naming?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about doing the clips, putting in there, how much, all those things, the names came from somewhere. Where did you actually type each of those in individually?
Oh, yeah. When I'm dropping in clips, I'm pausing to double click. And when I go in here, like for instance, congas, I'm in the wrong chunk. Let me just fix that 1 second here. We'll go to this, and we'll go to this. And so, for instance, if you'll notice that my MIDI tracks are generically named after I drag them in, but I could certainly come up here and I can right-click and rename the clip. And so, let's see here. I mean, you can have pretty long characters. You can have long names if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. You could have a long name for that. I just left them generically named because I was dragging, and that's my next example, is using MOTU's Ethno virtual instrument to create some cool playback clips. But yeah, name them, color them, organize them. You can do all that within the right click is going to get into things like naming it, setting the color, and so on and so forth, or whether you're going to insert something above it or below it. You're cutting and copying and pasting. Whether you want to set up MIDI Learn for that particular clip. There's a lot in the right click here. A lot of it's very self-explanatory, like renaming and setting the color for that. But cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. Chris, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm a little bit confused about the relationship between like the tracks overview window and the clips window. Like sometimes when you have audio clips or you have audio in the tracks window and it appears in the clips window. Like
I think the key here is that the clips that are in the cells in the clips window they're associated with their respective track, but they're not actually in the timeline. They're just sitting there ready to be triggered. Right. And when nothing is no clips are being triggered for a given track, what you're going to hear is whatever is in the timeline for that track. So think of the material that's in the timeline for the track as sort of like the backdrop, and that's what you're always going to hear until you trigger a clip, and then the clip takes over playback for that track, and it whatever is in the timeline stops playing, and then the clip starts playing at that point, and sort of takes over the playback in that track. And then when you kill that clip, or the clip stops playing, then playback immediately reverts back to whatever's in the track at that moment. And then there's a special row of clips at the very top of the clips window up there. The very top row, you'll notice on the left-hand side it says track. Yeah. And that's a way of triggering what's in the timeline within the context of the clips window. So you could, let's say you have like the cue grid is playing for 2 bars, and you click that track clip at the top, it drops down, and now you're playing, you're basically playing whatever's in the track.
Like you said, you have MIDI tracks and you have audio tracks, and when you go into the clips window, if there's nothing here in these MIDI tracks, but we can put clips on those tracks, and they can play in place of the track itself, and we can play enable at any time what's in the timeline. The very top track is the timeline. And so you're not going to see the MIDI. You're not going to see these MIDI clips because they're not actually in the timeline. They can play. They can play in place of the track. And at some point, I'm going to show you how you can record these clips back into the timeline. And so we're going to get there actually at some point here. But it's a good question. I understand, psychologically, kind of like, well, where are these tracks? Where do they live? They're actually hosted on these cells. And we're able to play them, whether in scenes or individually. We drop them down, and they'll play in the queue, and they'll play at the bottom until something goes in place of it. Edward, did you have a question?
Just a quick one. When you disable stretch, does the audio snap back to its original tempo?
Yes, it does. Exactly. So be aware of that. Generally it's a good idea with clips, obviously, to have stretch turned on so things are locked to tempo. But I'm going to show a situation where I've got stretch turned off because I don't want the tempo to change. And so, but yeah, generally, if you've got audio loops, you're going to want those to lock to tempo.
Of course, but I was just wondering if you can stretch back or go back to the original.
What's cool is, it'll go back to the original tempo if you turn off stretch, and then of course you can always re-enable stretch, and it will update to the time, whatever the tempo is set to. Cool.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So let's continue here. We were talking about using Stylus and dropping in loops. And so now we're going to switch to another example. I'm going to play enable this chunk. Okay, so we're in a new chunk here called Ethno. And this is where I'm going to use some of the Ethno loops inside of the clips window. And I was just pointing out that if I double click, of course, on the virtual instrument, and I've got 14 MIDI channels in Ethno being used. And I wanted to point out that when you make one of the MIDI tracks active, you're able to turn on or off map. If map is turned off, you can drag and drop the audio files right out of Ethno. Or you can also drag and drop the MIDI files. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to come in here and switch over to the clips window. And so now you can see I've got color-coded tracks. And I didn't really so much name the tracks. I was just in a mode where I was taking various MIDI loops and phrases and dropping them into different cells, creating clips. And I've got there again, like we talked about, there's the bass MIDI channel, there's the bar drum, and so on and so forth. And so let's just see. I'm going to try to create a performance dragging and dropping these things down. So I'm going to hit scene 1. Bringing in pads. Got a filter. Get rid of the filter. Dropping elements out. Different scene. So now if we stop during this and we're thinking about maybe the possibility of using a laptop with Ethno in a live situation where I've got a guitar player or a horn player and we're just going to create a spontaneous playback. We're just going to do a groove, kind of an intermission kind of thing where I've got elements picked out, loops, pads, you can see. I've got some filter things that I'm dropping on the master fader, and we want to create some kind of performance, and of course everything is in this fluid MIDI form, in the clips form. So, right off the bat, it was like, well, maybe we can make this a little bit faster. It's a tempo slider, so let's just bring this up to 125. And maybe this time we'll start with individual elements. Like, let's see, I'm going to clear out what's playing down below. Nothing in the cue. I got my grid here set to 2 bars. That tends to be pretty nice in a way, because quick note on the grid, okay? I want to make sure this is clear. If I have an 8-bar loop and I drop it down, it's going to continuously play those 8 bars. If I drop something in and the actual grid is set to 2 bars, whenever I drop something down, 2 bars later, it's going to enter into being played. So that's the idea. That's where you set how quickly will it drop down, and that's the cue grid. It will drop down in 2 bars, 4 bars, 8 bars, and sometimes I feel like 2 bars for the work that I like to do gives me enough time to sort of react and create things quickly, and that seems to be a good sweet spot for the way that especially for the demos that I've created. You'll notice I use 2 measures a lot as a grid, and I've got a lot of empty clips here. We talked about why use empty clips, because if something's dropped down and playing, I might use empty clips for scenes to flush out what's playing currently. And so that's the idea here. And so let's say we're going to create a new sort of groove here. Let's start this time with maybe a pad, and then we'll add some elements, and we've got the tempo a little bit faster. So let's see what that sounds like with Amazon pad. Okay, let's see what that's like. Different pad. A bass part. Take the bass out. Take these elements out. So again, I want you guys to start thinking about how you could use this for creating arrangements. And again, we've got our MIDI keyboard controller set up where we can trigger individual clips or scenes. And so now we're really using DP. Imagine with DP already having the ability to have chunks. So you're in a live situation where you're playing back different songs, although you're within a song, and now you're even doing not just songs with chunks or entire sequences. Now you're doing phrases inside of one particular chunk. And now we're dropping elements down, we're changing the tempo, and we're going to just kind of create a groove. And then a solo trumpet player is going to play, and we're going to just be able to create. And I only just did this quickly to kind of create backing tracks of different types of percussion instruments. And it'd be nice to have it modulate. So I mean, I could do that. I could come in here and say, well, the Amazon pads are just playing this sort of C pedal. What if we actually come in here and I'll just duplicate the pad, double click on it, bring up the pad editor. We're going to select all, and we're going to modulate up a half step or whatever. So remember, you've got the clip editor. We haven't really hammered on the clip editor as much as we probably should, which is if I double click on any of the parts, there are the MIDI phrases. There's the MIDI notes. We've got our name, our track color, and this yellow bar indicates the loop point. So these are mostly all 4-bar phrases. So we can get in here. And by the way, down below, we talked about inserting automation, getting into our note velocities. So, and if we duplicate things, again, we can option drag, we can right click, we can rename, we can do things like MIDI Learn. And so you guys are getting the idea here that we have currently we don't have really anything happening in the timeline at all. Nothing at all. It's just playing back a specific tempo. And now I've gone into the clips window and I've populated all these individual cells for all these different types of percussion instruments with different clips. And so now I'm firing them off one by one or in scenes, and I'm creating a performance. And so that's what I want you guys to sort of understand about this cool window that we've added now on top of everything that DP already does. And so now let's talk about how do I record right into the clip? And that's the next example I want to talk about here. So we're going to switch to this chunk. And this would be kind of fun. I want to explore this project a little bit more in terms of using, and again, Ethno is a great VI that we've had on the market for a while, and it's still very good and works really well with all the major DAWs. And it comes with a nice collection of samples and phrases. So that's Ethno with clips and DP10. We're going to switch over to recording examples. Okay, so here's the idea. Let's go switch over. and record to clips. A very easy project. I've got a MIDI track. It's assigned to MX4. So let's see what it sounds like. I picked a cool lead part here. It's a little dry. So let's actually add an echo here to it. Yeah. It's got more personality. And of course, MX4 is our multi-synth that comes with DP10. And of course, it's great. It does lots of different types of synthesis, you know, wavetable synthesis, FM synthesis. And we've got a filter here. Let's maybe darken it up a little bit here. And of course, we have, you know, 6 LFOs, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with MX4. And so that's the source that I'm using here for the for MIDI recording. And of course, I could just record traditionally right in DP, but what if I wanted to actually capture it right inside the clips window? So the MIDI track is in record. We're going to go over here to clips, and there it is. There's the MIDI MX4 synth. There's the vocal. There's the virtual instrument, and I've got it in record. And now you can see I've got a record icon that now appears in each of these empty cells. So if I click, in fact, before I click on it, let's go to the mini menu of the clips window, and I'm going to turn off play on clip cue. So if play on clip cue is selected, when I actually click and play enable a cue, DP starts playing. Okay, and that's cool. You pretty much want it that way a lot when you're dealing with elements, loops, and things like that. But I'm going to turn that off because I don't want to have to jump into record right off the bat. I want to be able to think about what I'm going to play. I'm going to turn on the metronome, and we're going to just loop it here. Let's see, at 120 beats per minute. I'm going to make sure we're looped here for 2 bars. Okay, so I'm going to drop this down. And so now, when I hit play in Digital Performer, I'm going to hit the space bar. It's going to put me in, and I'll add a part here. Okay, so what did we just do here? Let's clean this up a little bit. And so 16th is fine. We'll clean that up a little bit. And that's going to be just like a little lick here. But why don't we do, and what's cool, when I just did that, by the way, as soon as I'd finish the 2-bar phrase, it's just going to stay down below, and it's just going to continuously loop. So let's see. Okay, let's do another one. So I'm going to actually I'm going to clear out what's playing. I'm going to put this one in record. It drops down. It's waiting for me to hit play. So that one's beat up. So I'm going to actually hit, let's see, space bar. So I could, of course, go in here and edit it, and we can clean things up. Let's say we tidy it up a little bit, quantize it, and so on. So now I feel like this one, I could rename this one. This should be lead 1. This one should be, you know, let's actually change the actual clip color. You know, I want to get organized about the way I set up these files. So now, I mean, again, I can record right into individual clips for this one MIDI track. And so maybe as we're playing different loops, it's like, well, I can trigger these as different sections. This is sort of the intro section, or however you want to organize that. But this is just one MIDI track, and I can have lots and lots of different performances as 2-bar phrases, 4-bar phrases, 8-bar phrases, and I'm recording right into the clips window. And that's a cool feature. And remember, you double click on it, and you can change the color, change the name, quantize it, and so on and so forth, change the loop point. Well, this should actually loop every bar, every beat. You know, you have all that capability. So now we've just recorded right into MIDI, and that's great. What about audio? How do we record audio? So we're going to do that together. So I'm going to take the MIDI track out of record. We're going to go into audio, track my Vox here, and you can see audio monitor is Shift A and DP. Shift A is our input level. Check 1, 2. It's a nice level coming from the 414 mic. So how are we going to do this time? So we've got it set to loop, and we're going to go into clips. And here's my audio track. So here it is. I'm going to put this top track into record. It drops down. It's waiting for me to hit play in Digital Performer. So we're going to do that. I'm going to hit play. Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So I've got a little syncopated talking there, and that's the same concept. I go to the next one. And now I'm going to actually clear what's out. I'm going to hit play. Let's hit from the beginning. I'm going to hit play. Check, check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And so now, oh, there, let me actually finish my recording pass. Let's do this one more time. I'm going to drop it down. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's finished. 1, 2, 1, 2. So I can edit that now. I double click, and hey, there's me speaking. I want to clean this up a little bit. Let's do some edge editing. Oh, look, it's analyzed the beats maybe we could quantize this. Why don't we quantize this? I mean, we have the technology here. Da, 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 da. So we can, oh, I have to turn on stretch. So we're actually going to do that. We're going to turn on stretch. So we're going to undo what I just did. Remember, when you don't have stretch turned on in DP and you actually quantize audio, it's going to actually go in and do an offline process to the audio. And that was the way we used to do it. And of course, now we don't have to do that because we can actually just quantize using stretch. So how do we do that? We're going to go over here to the vocal track. We're going to turn on the stretch. We're going to go back to clips, double click on the voice. Well, there it is. It looks like I could quantize it, so we're going to do that. Quantize it to, I think eighths is probably going to be okay. And now we've got me tidied up. My voice is out of time. So let's just see what it sounds like. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, you know, still not too great. So we're going to delete that data. But what we've just done, as a reminder, with this particular chunk is the idea of taking and recording MIDI and audio right into clips. And just as a quick recap, very quickly, we'll go back. When the MIDI is in record, we go to clips, and then when we play enable it, oh, let's put, we got it in record, when we click on, these are the ones I've already recorded. So we'll actually delete those. When I hit record, it drops down, and as soon as I hit play, I'm recording for the duration of the grid. That's an important point. For the duration of the grid. So this is a really short little snippet, 2 bars, but it could be, 16 bars. And then when it finishes, it's just going to continuously play it. So check this out. This is great when I'm kind of preparing and I'm in my studio and I'm working on parts, but what if it was a live situation? What if you wanted to do something where you've got all these things playing back and you're creating the scene and you wanted to have a lead guitar part record down, and then the next time it comes back around, you're going to harmonize that part. You could totally do that. You could record it, drop it down, play the part, it's going to drop out and it's going to play it back, and now you're adding the harmony part to it. So again, it could be used in a studio, something you designed and edited, or it could be done on the fly in a live situation. So that's recording audio and MIDI right into the clips window themselves, and that's a feature that we give you. There's another scenario that we're going to talk about, and that's the what I want to end on later. We're getting there actually, and that's where I can capture my clips performance. When I'm doing all these triggerings, and bringing things down and scenes and individual, how do I capture that performance? And that's the next big thing we're going to get into. But there is a couple other workflows I want to talk about. Now here's one that I wanted to mention. It's called scoring. And this is where I really want all of my film composer, musician guys, I want them to really pay attention, because I really want to see if you guys can utilize this kind of thinking for composition and for film scoring in particular. So here's the idea. I'm using the UVI workstation, which is what comes with, well, that's our Soundbank. It uses the UVI workstation from UVI, and it's a great free player, and we give you a nice 5 GB sample library. So all the sounds you're going to hear, these orchestral sounds, come from UVI workstation. So you'll see if I go in here to the browser, MOTU instruments, and it has a nice collection of things like loops, organs, classical instruments and whatnot. And so yeah, I've got a lot of sounds loaded in here, 9 different MIDI channels loaded onto this laptop. And so you'll notice I'm going to do an 8-bar phrase for this example. Now here's the cool thing. I'm actually using a conductor track. I'm using a varied tempo. So a lot of people think of clips as, well, it's for electronic music, it's for sort of metronomic music, but it doesn't have to be. You can actually, I went into the conductor track, and remember, if you highlight the conductor, Shift-G shows you a graphical representation. So when I'm playing back this orchestral MIDI example, I've got a varied tempo. And that's actually really cool because, how often can you do clips? I'm not even sure if other DAWs can do varied tempos for clips. Maybe they can, but this is, of course, DP being a very musical tool that it is, would let you not only play back loops and clips, but to a varied tempo. And so that's going to be just a subtle thing that's going to bring a little bit of nuance to the tempo of this piece. So here's what I've done. I'm going to highlight these tracks, and we talked about shift, comma. So here's what I've done. I've played in parts. I've copied them in as MIDI clips. Now I've copied them and I've modulated them. So you can see the first one is sort of a C-sharp melodic minor-ish kind of vibe. And then I copied it up a half step. Then, you know how in DP we were talking about you can actually transpose MIDI parts into different modes. So what I had which was sort of a melodic minor kind of vibe, I actually decided to make it really sort of Lydian major sounding. So as I trigger this, you're going to hear it kind of really change tonality, and this is all just MIDI stuff. But I want you to think of it from film scoring. like if you were going to audition various instruments and parts together. So I'm going to try to, quote, kind of create a performance of triggering these different elements. And let's see what that sounds like. So let's try it. Make sure here that I'm set to play on clip cue, meaning when I hit play, DP starts playing, and that's important. I'm going to hit save. Okay, let's just try it for fun. What do we have here? Let's start with the element of a bass. Take off the click. Harp, doing a pulse. Oops. Bringing in percussion instruments, taking out the clarinet. I'm going to bring in the horn on the modulated section. So again, you know, very sort of spontaneously taking MIDI elements. And so I'm thinking as a composer, if this is what you do and you're creating these, you know, these parts for different types of tracks, you know, you're creating some kind of a phrase, a MIDI phrase, whether it's 8 bars, 16 bars of a MIDI part, you've got percussion elements, you've got string arrangements, you're looking at picture. Now you're opening up the video window in DP, go to project, I'm going to add my movie window, it's all locked to picture, and now I'm sitting with the director and I'm just, or by myself, and I'm auditioning different elements, like, hey, I'm going to do a reduced score, I'm going to take some part of it and just play the counter melodies, or the melodies, or the foundational instruments. And so I'm just going to audition these things. Now, you know, of course you could sit at the piano like a lot of composers and improvise and play over scenes, but how would you really do that with traditional DP? I mean, you could play enable various parts, but how could you do that really interactively? And so that's something I wanted to kind of offer that as something, as a challenge for composers, is to, I feel like this is, imagine now if you were a composer and you were a cello player and you wanted to go and do a score playback live in a cafe, and you had your laptop and you were playing these instruments and triggering various elements, and every performance was completely different. It was totally improvised. It wasn't some set, you're not just playing an iPod of a track and playing on top of it. No, everything is uniquely different. Starting, stopping, tempos, different parts. And again, so I'm, you know, thinking of it from a digital performer standpoint, thinking it from like a musical language standpoint. How could I use clips? Could I use clips for auditioning different parts? So that's where I want you guys to start kind of opening your minds up to the idea of scoring with clips and having a varied tempo, having different elements drop in, percussion elements. And so, and again, we were able to highlight parts, modulate parts, trigger things in and out. And so that's sort of a quick, very down and dirty example of how we would use, you know, clips in a scoring environment with virtual instruments. And of course, you know, we're just using the workstation, but imagine with all of the, you know, the sound libraries that you have, all the Vienna, all the Spitfire, the amazing mock-ups, and being able to trigger and create performances right from the clips window in DP. So that's just a quick example of, and you can see that here are the elements that I actually recorded. You see, this is me playing this little, you know, kind of pedal bass part here in the pits. And when I did this work, you can see I staged it out here in the right, but I could copy it. Then I went into the mixing board or the clips window and I said, well, I'm going to paste it in here to this part, paste. Let me double click on it. This one I'm going to actually modulate, or how about we transpose this one to a different key? And so you can do all this work. And again, like not loops and electronic music, like actual, like, you know, legitimate scored music. And so that's the idea here. We're going to go to another example, which is a completely different mindset. So this is a mindset where what else can we do with clips? Okay, well, here's the idea. You see these tracks that I've got here in the tracks window, bass, guitar. These are stems, okay? You know, collection, you know, basically mixed stereo mixes from a full mix, the reduction of mixes into elements like bass, guitar, and horns. So here's the idea. What if you wanted to perform live and you had your click track and you had the bass, guitar, horns parts, and you wanted to be able to trigger those in a live situation with your band, and you wanted to use the clips window? Well, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go into the clips window. Now, each of these colors represents a different song. Okay, and this one here is called Strike 90. It's a funk song. So here's what I've got. I've got not only the bass elements and the guitars, but I also have a click track. So now watch what happens. If I want to show you something, if I double click on these, they're linked to the scene, meaning that, by the way, I didn't mention that before, but if something is linked to a scene, when I trigger the scene, they'll all drop down. But what you might do is have an individual element unlinked to the scene. Now, sometimes you want it to be linked, sometimes you don't want it to be linked to a scene. You have that choice in this window. But right now, one thing I want you to see is that these are not loops. All these examples that I brought in for songs. Now remember, your band is playing live, you're using Digital Performer on a laptop. You're going to use, not chunks, you're going to use the clips window to play each of the songs in your set list. Okay, so that's what we're going to use clips for. And that's the example I'm going to show you, is we're going to drop all the elements down for a song, including the click track. Now, we're going to hear the click, but the click could go out of a separate output to like your in-ear monitor system, or a separate pair to, you know, I got to the stage wedges or the in-ears and not the house, obviously. But you're going to hear the click here. And of course, what's cool about this setup is that on any given night, if the horn players are here, we could mute that track. Or, hey, tonight we've got the guitar player in, we don't need that track. I'm just going to mute those tracks because we have someone covering that part. And that's a cool thing, but I'm going to leave these all in here so you can hear it. And I'm going to play the first tune. I look over at the drummer on the side of the stage. Is he ready to go? Cool, let's do it. 2, 3, 4. It's short. That's the end of the song, okay? People are clapping, yay, this is great. It's not gonna loop, it's not gonna loop. I'm looking, everyone's still cheering, happening. Okay, look at the drum, are you ready? Play the next one. Okay, here it comes. And the next song, oh, cut it off, wait, we're gonna start that over, or whatever. So I've basically taken and copied into each of these. Now look, what's cool is each of these has its own tempo. And I wanna make sure you see that stretch is turned off, so that whenever we're in clips, we don't have to follow the tempo. In fact, we wouldn't want to follow the tempo. But what's pretty brilliant about this program is that if I wanted to, I could actually have them all play at the same tempo. So if I did actually, in fact, turn on stretch, now all those examples in clips, all the way from 90 beats per minute, 100 beats per minute, 110, 115 will all play at the right tempo. So let's just see, let's say there's going to be a medley at the end here, and we're all going to play this medley all at the same tempo. You could do that. So let's just say for fun, what would that sound like? Oh, let's try it. So I'm going to hit the first one. It's going to be 120. I've muted the click here. Let's hear the next one. Hear the next one. The reason why it was hesitating is because I've built the 4 clicks into each of those, you see? So I might want to think about how, whether I wanted to have instant triggering, because I have lead time built into each of those audio stems for the click, because I don't want them to play instantly. So again, this is something you and your playback engineer, back when, remember when there used to be gigs and people playing in clubs and stadiums. We'll get back there, hang in there. But this, again, I mean, DP was so widely used on major tours anyway with chunks. You know, everyone knows, you know, well, most people know that Digital Performer having this modularity of sequences and chunks is widely used on, you know, all these major tours. Like Mike McKnight does Roger Waters, and he's done Madonna and, you know, Mariah Carey for years and years, and he's the guy that creates the playback system. And so, okay, so he was using chunks, but what if we could use clips and chunks? What if I could actually, and see, there's something really, you know, I remember how we set up a keyboard control. So I'm on the side of the stage, I've got the laptop, and I've got my first pad for song 1, second song for pad 2, and again, everything is just based on triggering them live. They can wait as long as we want. So this is an example that has really nothing to do with songwriting per se, more so of using clips for playing back tracks in a live situation with or without clicks, muting any different instruments on any given night, depends on who your crew is that night, your bandmates. And so this is a cool feature. This is like using clips for playing back live. Okay, cool. So we're going to clear out what's playing. Remember the idea of being able to hit play. They all drop down. I can get my balance and so on and so forth. I could put master effects on here, set up a limiter, set up a compressor. So this is cool. We've got a couple more examples here, and then we'll open it up for questions. The next one I want to talk about is, this is a film trailer that I mixed for Immediate Music, which props to Immediate Music, and thanks to them to let me show this example. They're actually a part of the BMG music production company now, Immediate Music. So this is a session that I mixed, and you can see this is just a traditional session, you know, just a project that you mix. It's not clips, it's nothing fancy at all. It's just a bunch of tracks that I'm editing and mixing and doing my thing on. And it looks like this is just the stems because there's no audio processing. It's already been done. But so what can we do now? What with clips? Like, how can we take this song, this trailer, and actually do something creative with it? Well, we can do that. So let's talk about how. And so we're going to turn on stretch, and we're going to go into the sequence window. And you can see here, everything's nicely on a grid. I've got the first phrase here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's, you know, we're going to think of that as sort of like section 1. So all we're doing now in the sequence editor is coming in, looking at our audio tracks, and I'm going to actually click over all these tracks. Okay, I've lassoed all 8 tracks, or how many tracks? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I've lassoed these 8 bars. Copy. Now watch what happens when we switch to clips. I'm going to paste, boom. I just pasted that in there. They're still selected, so I think I'll right click, and I'd like to set the color for these guys. So let's do that. And these guys are going to be a kind of a purple color. Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to go back to the sequence window. And so that's going to be my first section. And let's go out here. This tune kind of builds and builds and builds. And so let's see, bar 61, things really get kind of cruising here on this sort of high impact trailer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Did I get that right? 8 bars at bar 61. Copy. Switch to clips. I'll skip a scene here. Paste. Look how it does that. Top to bottom, left to right. Okay. This isn't work at all. This is literally copy, paste. Nothing to it. 2 strokes. Right? So now these are still selected. I'll right click and I'll set these colors. Clip color. These will be a nice kind of a green color. I'm going to click out. So what do we have here? What can we do with this? Well, let's just take what were elements of a mix and turn those into something kind of creative. So I know that I'm not going to want the high pad to trigger in this scene. So I'm going to move it down. And I might use this guy. Well, let's see, I've been playing with this. But well, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start with some elements, and we're going to just get grooving here. So I'm going to use this trailer as a means of improvising. Next scene. Dropping down the pad. Different drum part. save. I'm going to change the tempo on the fly. Watch. 140. Here it goes. I'll do it on the downbeat. Keep speeding up the tempo. It's not doing it with any glitches. Even faster. I'm going to go down to 35 beats per minute. You ready for this? It's all grainy. Going to go back to 133. Back to tempo. Take the percussion out. Take the bass out. So wait a minute. We just took what was just a mix and we went into the sequence editor. We're copying things, pasting it into clips, and now I'm triggering these elements individually. I can assign them to pads and controllers and stuff. I'm dropping in different elements. I'm changing the tempo on the fly without glitches. And like, this is DP that like I'm doing this with, like the film scoring program can do this. Yeah, I mean, this is like, that's why I feel like, honestly, in my assessment, like this is the most advanced DAW. Like it's not close. Like having everything that DP already does and having the interaction of audio playing with ZTX, this is like really next level stuff. And it's amazing. I mean, these tools that you have. So to back up for a minute, and by the way, everything I've done in here, we can just clear out. And I could just say, select all, bye-bye, it's gone. Go back into the sequence window, and then just redecide, like, well, how do we do that? So double tap W, which we all know now, double tap, select, copy, back to clips, paste. And so this is so cool now. I want you guys to start thinking about songs that you've recorded already, whether they're just like, whatever they are, cues, songs, jingles, and now, what if I took those elements and I copied them into clips and I triggered them separately and put effects on them and changed the tempo? And this is going to open things up, hopefully, for people to do some creative stuff with DP. And that's why I wanted you guys to see these tools, because I think you can do probably way more than what I'm doing. But this is just to get you kind of going here. So again, copying and pasting, and everything that we copied, we could paste right into the clips window. So the last example we have here is another little kind of electronic cue. And this is the one that we're going to actually capture my performance. Because I want you guys to see how everything that I'm doing in clips is not just me. I want you guys, this is really important. Everything I'm doing in clips is not just free winging it as I go. Like, oh, I'm just gonna, hopefully I don't remember what I did, but I can't remember, but because I just did it on the fly. And this is capturing the performance of it. And this is what's really, really cool about DP. Okay, so I know right off the bat, so this is an electronic kind of piece here. I'll play a little bit for you. So let's see here. Okay, so you can see I've got play and Falcon and Omnisphere in here. And so I'm not going to use this intro. I'm only going to have it kick in here around bar 13. So we're going to do this. We're going to build this little arrangement together. I'm going to highlight these MIDI tracks. For, again, we'll think in terms of 8 bars. That's 8 bars right there. Okay, I'm going to copy it, and we're going to go to clips, and we're going to make sure we're at scene 1, paste. Okay, that's going to be sort of my first section. Okay, and I'm going to go back to tracks now, and I know that you can see, so I think, let's see, bar 21. Let me hear what bar 21 does here for a second. Yeah, it's sort of think of it as sort of like a pre-chorus bridge kind of thing. So I'm going to use that. I like it. And I'm a little loud. I'll turn down a little bit. So let me make sure that, okay, so this is going to be my quote bridge section, and it looks like it's 8 bars. So copy, clips, paste. Am I on the right channel here? Yes, I am. I've made that mistake before. I'm on the wrong channel. So now we have a chorus, which is bar 29. Is that true? Oh, I think I have a swell. Let's see, bar 30. Yeah, because I think 29 is a, oh no, okay. So 29 is sort of the chorus. Okay, and this is like again like a very pushing kind of electronic piece. So what do we have here? Is this 8 bars? Yes, it is. Copy. This will be our last one that we paste here. We've got 3 sections. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to worry about naming them or color coding them. We talked about that, right click and changing the name, changing, what color it is and so on. Not even going to get into that. Not even going to be worth it. Now, here's the interesting thing. I'm saving. I'm going to go back to the tracks window. Now, I want to capture my performance. That's what we're going to do here today. So I'm not going to loop. We're not going to loop. We're just going to play. Now, I don't want to record over what's here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select all. And of course, Command L will let me shift later by literally 250 bars to the right. So let's see. Let's make sure that it did go out there. 250 bars later is my song. No problem. That gives me plenty of time to do a performance and capture it and not write over anything. Cool. So now, how are we going to do this? Let's go back to clips. And I'm not going to take the time necessarily, because I want to get to your questions, to assign things like MIDI Learn to scenes and individual, but that's where it's really fun, be able to assign various shortcuts and commands to that, but we're not going to get into that right now. What we're more concerned with is playing this and capturing the performance. Okay, so we're saved, and I'm just going to be winging it here, just trying different elements and things, triggering both individual clips and also entire scenes. Okay, so how do we record this? What are we going to do? What we're going to do is go back to clips, and I'm going to not play on clip Q, okay? Because I don't want to cut off the beginning, so I'm going to disable this for a minute. And so now check this out. This is important. You see how we're up here in the top of DP and we're going to record, okay? And if I hold Option, okay? If I hold Option, this is going to let me record the clips. This is a very unique feature for clips. Option click record is going to let me record my clip performance. So when I'm done with it, I option click and I'm back to the traditional record. And you can see it's taken a little bit of a different shape. It's got a unique look to it, the record button. Okay, so what are we going to do? Let's hit record in DP. I'm going to turn on the metronome at first just to see once I get into the performance. Okay, so here we're going to hit record. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's recording. I don't need the click anymore. I'm just going to start adding elements. Let's see, what do we have here? Okay, let's get our bass going here. Going to stay grooving on here for a while. I think it's time for scene 2. Time for the chorus. Elements out. I like that. Back to scene 1. Start taking elements out. Okay, that was something. So save. We go back to the tracks window. There it is. There's my entire performance as clips. This is so cool. Like, I mean, I'm still impressed by this too. I'm like, wait a minute. Again, like DP just captured my entire performance. Every move that I made in the clips window is now in the tracks window, and everything is still safely out at bar 250. So how do I edit this now? What can I do with this stuff? Let's go into the sequence editor and let's start looking at our tracks and look at all my clips. So this is where now I go have lunch. I fuel up, I come back, and I decide, you know what, I'm going to cut this off here. Let's switch over here to clips. This is going to cut off here. This is going to get repeated, you know, and so this is where you can do all this background work. You capture the performance. Now you might want to clean it up a little bit. You know, but everything's on the grid. Everything's represented. It's all there. If I hit play, in fact, we'll just listen to a couple bars of it. By the way, I'll snip out that dead space. Remember in DP, if you highlight the first 2 bars, Command J will snip. So we're going to hear, let's just hear the first 20 seconds of what I performed. And let's just see what that sounds like. Remember, I started with the drums. Cat. Bass. So this is cool. Again, like this is kind of coming full circle, kind of, and we can pause here and talk about what we've learned. But the idea is that we have this new interactive, you know, part of Digital Performer called the clips window, where we're able to record into clips, we're able to trigger clips, scenes, individual clips. We can use it for a live band playback performance. We could use it for various elements in a live situation where we're actually playing and improvising. We can capture all of our clips. We can take existing songs like that film trailer and copy sections into clips and turn it into like interactive, spontaneous improvisations. So again, like hopefully you guys could take a lot from this. We're going to, you know, we'll edit it and you guys can kind of go through. I kind of was going pretty quickly through some sections, but let's just turn it over here to questions about the clips window. So let me hide that for a second. J. Raul?
Yeah, that's me. I have 3 quick questions. Where does the tempo info live in that series of 4 songs? You had one at 90, one at 100, one at 110.
Oh, well, in other words, here, let me switch back to DP for a moment here, you can see. In other words, the DP sequence is set arbitrarily to 120, but I have stretch turned off. So when I created those different, you know, I went to each of those songs and I exported those stems and I made a mental mark, you know, in the folder. Hey, that one's 90 beats per minute. This one's 110. So when I loaded those into clips, they're not adhering to the tempo at all. They're just staying their original tempo because stretch is turned off. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. So the clips are not lined up with the grid.
Well, I mean, they're lined up with each other. They're lined up with each other. They have 4 clicks and the song starts and they're all lined up together and they're all at 90 beats per minute. And so that way I was able to trigger them as a band might in a live situation. And they're independent. They're being triggered. They're one shots. They're not looped. And they're all playing together perfectly. And then I showed you a cool feature where if I did turn on stretch, they'll actually all play at the tempo, which is amazing.
Gotcha.
Cool. Thank you. What was your other question? You had.
What is multi-cue?
Oh, so multi-cue is, if we go into the clips window here, let me go to shift this. So when I cue something, if there's nothing down below in the cue, it just immediately starts playing. But what's cool is that as I'm cueing things, they can stack up in the cue. Does that make sense? So if I didn't want to have to wait and manually have to do it when something,
okay.
As I drop it, it comes down into the cue, and then whatever the grid is set to, every 2 bars, it's going to drop what's in the cue down. So what's cool is you can stack the cue like maybe 10 steps ahead. And then that way, every 2 bars, it's flushing and dropping. Yep, it's a good question. Thank you.
And if multi-cue is disabled, then it goes straight into now playing.
If there's nothing in cue, it goes right to playing. That's exactly right. But if something in cue, that plays first, and then for the duration of the grid, and then it comes down, plays, and stays there. And it'll continue to stay there unless something else comes into the cue.
I'm talking about the multi-cue feature. If that's turned off.
If that's turned off, everything that drops plays.
Okay. Last question. In the orchestral thing, I think you had the key changes, but the clips, their names didn't change. So if you like edit a clip and then
that was me being somewhat lazy. Like I should have gone in and renamed all the modulated clips. I just, in the interest of time. Even the track color for the ones that were in different keys or modes were not updated. But yeah, I mean, you could go in there and be very type A about, the ones that are in a different key or a different color, their name transposed, and so on. I just didn't have time to actually do that. But you bring up a good point. Good to be organized. Okay, cool. Thanks for your question. Miles, do you have a question?
You know, I have all my sample libraries on a PC through VE Pro. So I was just watching how you dropped and drag and dropped items out of Stylus. That I won't be able to do with it being on another computer. I'd have to reload my samples, at least Stylus, into DP.
That's right. In fact, usually when I'm advising composers who are building composer rigs, you know, obviously VEP is great. It's super lean. It's a great host. But I always tell people put beat-oriented, put at least a contact or two or a stylus or two that lives in the sequence itself. Now remember, DP these days, it's multi-core aware. It can use all the RAM, you know, in the 64-bit environment. So it wouldn't be probably too much overhead to put a couple of those elements into the actual sequence. So you have the luxury of drag and dropping MIDI data and slice information. But, you know, to each his own. Like, you'll have to decide if that's a worthwhile investment. It's usually, those are usually not super taxing.
Right. Well, Stylus would definitely, out of all those Spectrasonic libraries, that would be the best, I think, to...
Yeah, exactly, as opposed to like Omnisphere or something heavier. And Omnisphere doesn't really have the MIDI drag and drop thing, so you're right. I mean, anything that's sort of drum oriented with loops, those could maybe live in your new template in the sequence.
Would you use also, one other question is the drum, Easy Drummer?
Yeah, exactly. Easy Drummer would live in DP, so you can do the MIDI drag and drop. It's got a good feature for that too. Yep.
Cool. All right, thanks.
You got it. Rich, did you have a question?
Yeah, how are you? Thank
you.
I guess you piqued my interest when you said you can use these inside of chunks, like live. I used chunks for years in DP for songs playing live. But you could also now incorporate one of these, like loop a section so the band could jam a while in clips, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
But live inside of that chunk.
Correct. That's a really good point. I mean, you could have, so did you guys notice that for every chunk that I showed you today, that I had a separate clips window? So the clip wasn't global. Does that make sense? Like in this project that we call Clips Demo, I had whatever, like 8 or 9 different chunks. Each of those chunks had its own clips. Right. And each one could have its own tempo. So like you said, that's really cool. Maybe you're using a combination of chunks and clips for the band where you get to this one tune where it's a jam. Like every night, who knows, it goes on for 10 minutes where they're all just jamming and playing and people coming on stage. And you've set that up in advance and you know kind of generally where the tempo needs to be. By the way, once you bring in the audio from the recording, it can change night to night because you've got this amazing ZTX. So, but let's say it's around whatever, 95 beats per minute, and everybody's just jamming up there, and it's just looping and looping and looping, and you can stop or bring elements in and out, and you can just have things in there as clips that you may want to use night to night.
So it's, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like it's blowing my mind right now because I'm using Ableton Live, but I would much prefer to come back to DP for that.
Well, I'm so glad that you brought that up because that's the whole message today is imagine a program like DP with all that it can do with chunks and scoring and ZTX, and now you've got this other unbelievably interactive layer on top of that, but it doesn't defeat, you know, chunks, and it doesn't defeat all the other cool stuff. It's not like you're giving up anything. Right. So that's cool that you recognize that. Let us know how it goes.
All right, thank you.
You got it. Daryl, do you have a question?
Yeah. Again, I'm using a laptop, and I'm trying to figure out how to color code the tracks, and I can't figure it out.
You mean in just the regular tracks or clips?
In the clips.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you know, you can just simply, if you just highlight the actual clip, and you can right-click, or if you double-click on it, it brings up the editor. You know, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do the color from the editor, or you can just right-click on the clip and just say, set clip color.
Okay, I tried to do the right-click with
if he has a trackpad, you might have to do a 2-finger click, Matt.
What's that?
If he has a trackpad, it might be a 2-finger click.
Do you have a trackpad?
But it's also control click.
Yeah, you can control click, exactly.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks.
Cool, you're welcome. Ryan, did you have a question?
Yeah, hi, Matt. Early in the session, you showed a couple examples where the tracks overview window only had a couple audio tracks visible.
Right.
But when you open the clips window, you have MIDI clips already populated.
Correct.
Were those dragged in earlier?
Yeah, I just did that work in advance, and that was my Stylus example. I'll go back to it just a second.
Yep.
I'm still screen sharing here, right? Yeah. Okay. So in other words, like you said here's a couple of guitar, bass, groove things happening, and then nothing is in this track. And so what I did in advance is I brought up Stylus, and I went in and picked some grooves that I liked that kind of worked with the groove, with the guitar. And I went to each channel, and when you go into the editor and you pick the sounds you want, there's the drag and drop section. And so what I did is I just went into clips and said, oh, cool, that's the conga. I'm going to drag this over. And I'm going to actually, that time I wasn't lazy. I actually named the track and color coded it and so on and so forth. So I just did this work in advance.
Okay, so some of those like Stylus tracks, those require like a MIDI trigger, right? Or you just drag that and it's something that there was no MIDI data attached to it. It was just something.
Well, the cool thing about Stylus, I mean, not to spend a lot of time on this, but so with Stylus, there's a couple different ways. Like you can actually just manually play a note and do a trigger, a slice trigger, or you can actually, in this case, this is the actual MIDI slice, which represents whatever. If it's a two.
Right.
So this is where I was using that part of Stylus where I was dragging the MIDI file. So like watch what this looks like if I go to clips and I drag this over here to this and I double click on it. This particular groove is whatever 4 bars, and that's the slice. So that's what I did in advance. I didn't do like single note trigger. I did slices. Does that make sense?
So now that MIDI data is only visible in the clips track.
Correct.
So if I was looking at my tracks overview and I came back to a track, I would have to make sure there might be something populated in the clips window that I would miss in the tracks overview.
Yeah, I mean,
unless I check.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was basically saying that whatever MIDI data you put on these clips for this MIDI track are going to live here. They're not going to be seen in here. But remember that you can always, if you come back to the clips window and there's nothing, let's say there's nothing queuing here, you can always play enable what's in the timeline. That very top track will always take you back. So you always have the ability to play what's in the timeline, or you can play, clips that are basically being populated in that track. So it's just that you're not going to see. Now, what's interesting about this, if you wanted to, you can move between windows. You can copy between the clips and take something back into the tracks and vice versa. I mean, it's not something that I'm showing in this example, but you can freely move between different edit windows with clip data. It's just that, I built this into the clips window because I wanted to create scenes. Yeah,
Gotcha.
You got it. You'll get the feel for it. Just start playing with it. Cool.
All right. Thank you.
You got it. Paul, do you have a question?
Yeah. You showed the orchestral example where you copied audio clips over to the clips window, right? Mm-hmm. And then you showed how to record a clip performance. If you record a clip performance and you have audio clips, would you get a resliced audio performance on the tracks page?
What's cool is that, when you bring in the audio, if it's audio that you're triggering, and like you said, I was doing a lot of MIDI examples, but if it was audio, it would actually look like, remember how in the very, very first example where I was dragging out the right handle and extending the duration? I can do that for both audio and MIDI if I print audio. When you record it into the window, in fact, let me do an example of it here. I'm sure I've got to have, I've got a ton of audio so let's do that. If I go to Clips Groove, and Clips Groove has a lot of, these are all audio tracks, you see? So let's just say I'm going to record a bar of that, okay? So we go into Clips, and I'll make sure I'm at the far left here. And I'm just going to play a couple of different things, and we're going to record it as audio, okay? So remember how we did that is I'm going to actually make sure that I'm going to turn off, play on clip cue, which is good. And I know there's nothing really for the first, 16 bars of this, so I'm not going to write over anything. So it's still set to that icon, option record, and now let's set to clips record, which is good. So now let's hit record, and I'm going to turn on the metronome just so I kind of know when to do my thing. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. We'll do a few here. 3, 4, 1. Off. Okay, we go back in. So there it is. This is audio. And now in the clips form. Okay, so we can now go into the sequence editor and let's make sure we're looking at these tracks. And I'm going to switch over to the clip view. And then what's cool is now we can just extend. Oh, let me go. I need to go to that. See, you notice, by the way, in the lower half, I can edge edit. Okay, and there's silence. But if I go a little bit higher, it switches to the loop icon. So now we've just successfully recorded audio into the timeline as clips. So if I want to edit the audio, I double click, brings up the editor. I can do my quantizing, edge editing, looping, and so on and so forth. But now this audio is not just standard audio in DP, now it's clip audio. And so I have the luxury of doing things like we talked about, repeating it, looping it. And so yeah, and then of course we can do full-on editing of our performance. Does that make sense?
Great, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the question. Miles, do you have a question?
Yeah, when you just did the audio recording, I was wondering, can you, let's say you're moving real quick and you're working with the MIDI tracks and you want to render those to audio real time right there, get those into audio. Can you do that when you record? Do you have to go back and then render it all down into a stereo track after you record the MIDI performance? Okay, so you've recorded this MIDI performance, and then you've got the MIDI tracks that you recorded. Can you be at the simultaneously putting that down onto an audio track?
Remember when I captured that performance, the electronic piece, and we had a lot of MIDI in there as the clips?
Right. Okay.
I could select all and bounce the disc and create my stereo mix. You know.
Oh, you could. Okay.
I mean, remember in DP you can do faster than real time offline bounce of MIDI or audio. So, or you could do them by sections and do stems, or you could do full mixes. But yeah, you don't have to worry about freezing. Remember, freezing is kind of a thing, I would say thing of the past, because some people do use freezing. But in DP, it's really easy now to be able to record, to highlight MIDI data and bounce offline. And when you bounce offline, you can have it included back into the sequence. And so, you know, if you've done a bunch of MIDI parts, you've got a bunch of piano parts and you highlight the MIDI track and you bounce to disk and you offline back into DP, it does it in 10 seconds and it's all sample accurate and perfect and it's not frozen and you don't have to wait for the real time. It just does it offline. So yeah, you could bounce. Anything that's MIDI is bounceable. Yep. Cool. Thanks for the question.
Yep. No, thank you for the answer.
You got it. Okay. So guys, we're going to wrap up and thank you for being here and for great questions, and stay tuned for more coming this week on Thursday and Friday.